Joining me to go through the stories today is political commentator Harrison Griffiths. Harrison, good morning.
Morning, Rosie. How are you?
I'm really well. Suella Braverman's warning then, front page of the Mail. I don't know if you saw images of what happened on Saturday. I was in central London. The protest march of Israel's bombing of Gaza. There was the Mail is describing here, some sickening displays of anti-Semitism and demonstrators openly supporting terrorism. What do you think of the Home Secretary's response?
Well, for a start, I think some of the scenes we saw were utterly vile. I was on my way out of London, actually on Saturday, and saw some of these people coming back from the protests, and I was taken aback by some of the imagery that a few of them were wearing, glorifying certain events in Palestinian-Israeli history, like the First Intifada, which I think can only really be interpreted as, at the most charitable level, a very callous disregard for Israeli civilians' lives. That said, I'm very wary of going down the route of, speech that most people find obscene being criminalised in the way it so often is. Although when you see scenes like people wearing pictures of paragliders at rallies, the temptation is to want the full force of law to come down on these people because it's utterly vile by any reasonable definition. But I'm still wary of people's speech being criminalised when it is peaceful, no matter how vile and repugnant we might find it.
That's the tension, isn't it? How do you police a protest like that where freedom of speech has got to be protected, but in that protest you do see people, well, the Home Secretary's words is behaving in a way that would glorify terrorism?
Well, exactly. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, while, as I say, it may very well be irrational, vile and repugnant, I think you do have the right to support political causes that you believe in, so long as you do it peacefully. It's a very different thing when you see images like those at, I think, the protest in Whitehall, where somebody else was waving an Israeli flag, as they have every right to do, and were attacked by a group of these pro-Palestinian protesters. That ought to be a crime. Calling for direct action against people, as we saw in some of these chants, calling, I believe, for Jewish blood, really awful things. That's a little bit different. But merely going out, in my view, and speaking in support of a certain cause or a certain organisation on its own, I think people ought to be free to do that, no matter how disgusting and vile and misplaced their cause might be.
Yeah, the Home Secretary said to all those who saw fit to promote genocide, glorify terrorism and mock the murder of Jewish people, including women and babies, the police are coming for you. And the story you mentioned there, Harrison, it's one of the women leading chants accused Israel, the UK, France and Italy of being terrorist states, and she was the one carrying the placard featuring this paraglider. The police are investigating. How do you think the police handled the event on Saturday?
I mean, these are always incredibly difficult things to handle, particularly when tensions are already running high. So, I almost feel in some ways a little bit unqualified to tell the police exactly how to do their job, because I'm sure they did to the best of their ability. But I mean, what was the most worrying thing for me was not necessarily that these protests got out of control, although in parts they most certainly did. And then the police should have a thorough review of those instances where they did, but just the sheer number of people that turned out. I'm sure there were people that turned up to those rallies with a sincerely held view that, that the rights of Palestinian civilians should be respected, who feared what's to come next for civilians in Gaza. But 1 week after an organisation has invaded effectively another country and gone around doing the most unspeakably violent and repugnant acts, often to innocent civilians, to be coming out and waving their flag a week afterwards, and to have so many tens of thousands of people doing it, whether it's controlled or not, whether I believe they have the right to express themselves or not is another question. Yeah. But that was sincerely and truly alarming to me.
Let's move on to the story on the front page of the Times. And Terry just sort of gave us some of the details there, our political correspondent, saying pop-up prison cells, deporting foreign criminals and making low-level offenders remove graffiti are going to be at the centre of a plan to overhaul sentencing and to ease prison overcrowding. Harrison, when you see this story, What do you make of this? The government are in a position where they have now to find alternative strategies because quite simply there is not enough space in prison to put all the people who would have had a sentence.
Yeah, and I've certainly heard little whispers that this type of pinch point, sort of real crucial point where prisons are seriously overcrowded and there's very little we can do about it, is coming. This doesn't seem to be the first sign that it is. I think the government have been aware for a few months that this might be the case, but just there's very little that they can do about it once it gets to that point. But I think some of these reforms actually are quite sensible, it seems to me. Deporting foreign criminals before a bit earlier in their sentences seems sensible, insofar as these are criminals we don't have to keep on the books for a very long time, and so that will ease the cost and ease the pressures in the pipeline. And I certainly would welcome the idea that low-level offenders, and what that means in detail isn't quite clear. But
I think things like drink driving, shoplifting, those type of offences.
Yeah, so drink driving, shoplifting, maybe low-level drug offences. I think it's very sensible that those people aren't in prison. And to me, we need, more broadly speaking, in this country to have more of a sensible conversation about how we use prison and how prison sort of, the seriousness of prison. Because now what I think every single person accepts is that certain violent criminals should be locked away in order to contain them from the rest of society. What I think we need to have a more serious conversation on is people who commit non-violent offences, things like drug offences. Do they need to actually be in prison? I would argue no. However, we are also seeing on the flip side of that, you have people committing what I would argue are non-violent offences like drug offences or even speech offences being sent to prison. But on the other hand, you also have just some really quite horrible stories of people committing seriously violent acts who should be contained for a very long time, getting what I would consider to be very lenient sentences and being able to leave prison halfway through through those sentences. So,
because the political sentiment
this could serve as a wake-up call to change our approach to prison.
It seems to be that both parties are saying, look, we're going to send more people to prison and for longer, but they can't actually do that in practice.
Precisely. It's the classic temptation and incentive of politics, which is people up and down the country realise that when it comes to certain offences like theft, in many parts of the country, it has been effectively decriminalised because the police won't prioritise it. They won't do a thing about it. And so, the political parties hear that concern and say, well, in the short term, we're just going to put more people in prison. But of course, that actually requires long-term investment in prison capacity. Yeah. And I think if there's one thing we know about our politicians, our political system, it does not incentivise actors to do those kind of long-term investments.
One of prison population is one problem facing the government. The other, of course, is what to do about illegal immigration. And we know the Supreme Court are ruling on the Rwanda plan. Inside the Times, there's an interesting story by the Home Affairs editor saying Home Office staff are being trained to make rapid decisions to determine whether individuals who arrive in the UK illegally meet the 4 criteria which will enable their deportation. And when they're saying rapid decisions, I mean, it's 30 minutes. That's how long they'll be given to prove that they're ineligible for removal to Rwanda. Does that seem like a fair process, do you think? Half an hour to prove your case?
No, not in the slightest. And it will inevitably result in real miscarriages of justice in this regard, and I think will worsen a policy that is already constitutes something that this country is going to be apologising for in 50 years' time. I think 30 minutes to prove a case, being deported halfway across the world, that case may not be particularly easy to prove. Your English might not be quite good enough for what I suspect is going to be the incredibly stretched and tired Home Office official on their 14th hour of work who's evaluating your case within 30 minutes. So no, I think this will satisfy the bloodlust of certain people who just want to see deportation flights because it makes them feel good. But I'm not sure that it's actually going to deliver anything resembling justice. And it's also a particularly expensive way to try and stop the boats.
Yeah. Well, the Home Office is preparing to spend about £700 million on deporting what the Times is saying, about 4,000 migrants to Rwanda by October next year. Of course, we've got no idea if they'll actually get the green light from the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister will be very keen for that to happen by October next year because, of course, that will be before a next general election. And then he could actually say he delivered on one of his pledges, whether you liked the pledge or not. If we talk about something positive, Harrison, I spent an extremely tense time from about 4 p.m. Yesterday afternoon. There is a rather fantastic photograph on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Farrell kicks England to the semi-final. Were you watching?
Absolutely. And very happy to see the result, although, you know, I know we're trying to end on an optimistic note, but it really shouldn't have been that close. And I'm not feeling particularly good about the prospect of South Africa later in the week.
We can just celebrate the fact that we got there, though, can't we?
Absolutely. And you know, I think we've done a pretty tremendous job, and I was very glad to see the result yesterday. At the very least, we outlasted France.
We did. Harrison Griffiths, thank you so much. A political commentator going through the stories inside the papers this morning.